circle us back to section 3, which are action items for this evening. As I said, we have 12 more to address this evening, and we will start with item 3.01. Mr. Toole, if you would like to take us through the financial report, and if you want to work through the ones that are specifically you, I'm free to let you go out of order, and I will take the ones that belong to me.
Yes, thank you. So 3.01 is the annual comprehensive financial report and the single audit report, which essentially this was our audit. However, what we've done in terms of trying to be more transparent and making it easier to read is we have moved our normal audit into and applied for the certification for an annual comprehensive report. Essentially what it does is it provides a lot more information, a lot of operating information, and it allows you to be much more transparent in the numbers that you see there and how we're operating. From my understanding is we're the first district in northwestern Pennsylvania and one of the few in western Pennsylvania that have applied for the certification for an annual comprehensive financial report. So that's a big accomplishment as we're working through, because it is a lot of data. If you can refer to page, the first page, and there's a letter that I wrote that kind of explains our financial position and the outcomes, as well as what the driving factors are. If we move on to, I'm going to skip through just a couple pages in here just to kind of highlight a few items within the report itself. On page 10, there's a financial highlights section that does give you some information in terms of how the district ended the year. Page 16 is a summary. This is the governmental activities. Essentially what it is the report is broken down into your MD&A, your management discussion and analysis, and then it goes into your financial reports, then the notes, then the operating statistics. The MD&A, the difference between the financial reports and the MD&A is primarily fixed assets and long-term debt. Your long-term debt, meaning accruing your interest in the pension and OPEB liabilities. And then your fixed assets is you're just recognizing depreciation. As compared to the financial reports at the fund level, it's more of it's a modified accrual, but it's more of the cash value that you have that you're paying for on an annual basis. If you do look through the first 16 pages, it outlines the differences between the MD&A reporting as well as the fund accounting, and then the notes help supplement that. But if on page 16, our net position for their government activities, which is the general fund as well as the capital projects and capital reserve funds, improved by about $9 million. I will say about $2.8 million of that is just a reclassification from the governmental activities to business activities. Essentially what that was is we wanted to recognize what the true net pension liability as well as OPEB liability was for the food service and child development funds. Historically, they were all recognized in the governmental. Well, we have recognized them moving forward into the respective funds, which is appropriate. As you can look on page 17, historically, when you would look at these items, the formatting is different here. We historically reported just local, state, federal revenue, instruction, support services, non-instructional, and debt as the line items. You can see here that we've broken it out by specific types of revenue as well as expenditures by department, which that theme will hold consistent throughout the entire report. If we move on to, I'm going to move to page 27. This is the fund level, as I was talking about, the difference between the government-wide and the fund level. Our funding end balance, or our fund balance, ending balance, was at $20.2 million for the general fund, about $30 million for our capital reserve, which is the bond money, and about $7.6 million for capital projects. Additional details were all included in this report, but as well as the presentation that I had given in the fall about how we ended the year. Again, I just wanted to reillustrate on page 29 the detail that we provided as compared to what we had been providing historically. 31, as you can see, the non-current liabilities. This is your food service and child development funds. You can see that now we're recognizing OPEB and your pension liabilities. That will also be included in your deferred inflows and outflows, which is going to be a big difference for those funds. Truthfully, they'll never show a positive net, well, I shouldn't say never. It'll be a while before they show a positive net position, the same way our government activities because of the pension liability itself. I mean, our pension liability is about 148 million. It's no different than every school district across the state of Pennsylvania has a sizable pension liability because of how underfunded the program is. And then the last item that I wanted to bring everybody's attention to is if you just go to page 77, this is brand new to the report. From page 77 to page 108 are operating statistics, and it shows a trend. We will typically, within an annual comprehensive financial report, you'd like to show 10 years worth of data. When you're looking at trending, I had 8 years. I chose 8 years because that's when I felt it was the most reliable information, is starting about 8 years ago as we're moving forward. But we will continue to add years to it until we reach that 10-year mark. That is a high level of where we are. The numbers didn't change at all from what I presented back in the fall, what the outcome was at the end of the year. But again, I just wanted to reiterate that we did try to provide much more detail in this report. You have history, you have much more greater detail into the department level, as well as our revenue, as we're trying to become much more transparent. Any questions?
No questions. Thank you for the transparency and the additional extra information. It is in the public side of Board Docs, so if you would like to read 108 pages of Aaron's sweat, blood, and tears, that's what he's been working on for a while now.
We will add additional information to you every year as we continue to move forward. This just was a lot of information to pull all in one year. We did submit, I think in closing, is we did submit the application to have the certification itself. It will take them 4 to 6 months until we'll hear back to understand whether or not it's been approved. Or,
you know, thank you, Aaron, for bringing the recommendation to the board and having the board, let you go ahead with this CAFA report for additional transparency for the district.
Thank you. Moving on to, if there's no other further questions, I'm going to move on to 3.02, which is the Erie County Technical School budget. You can see we have a resolution here that their budget in total is about expenditures of about 6.966 million. For secondary program contributions of about 4.77 million. Yeah, our contribution is roughly 840,000. It was up about 20,000, if I recall correctly. There it is attached. So we would be asking to have this budget approved, which has already been approved by the VOTEC board.
It's not been approved by the VOTEC. It's
okay.
Approved to be brought to the individual school boards. The distinct school boards of the Erie Technical School, they will then elect to pass or not pass it at the individual board meetings. They're asking us to do that by the end of this month so that they can then elect to accept the budget should it pass. Did I get that correct, Attorney Senate?
That's right.
I had it backwards.
Yeah.
I apologize.
Okay.
And Mike, this is based on our participation rate.
Yes, this is based on our participation rate. We actually saw a $15,306 increase to our contribution. It's only a 1.84% increase. The technical school had an average increase of 3.18%, and that is due to our participation has declined over the last few years. But we our three-year average, we've seen a decline of about 7% over the last 3 years, and that's why we saw our individual contribution has not increased as much as others. where the other school districts are seeing growth, we are seeing, you know, a minimal use of, we're not seeing many students erode away from the program. I'm excited to see that there are a couple of highlights of the program. They're going to bring on a instructor for sports therapy and exercise science program. So they are starting to revamp some of their programs there that will be enticing to our students as well. So while we may have a declining enrollment or participation at the moment, I see that the technical school is changing their portfolio of courses. So I envision that we may see some more of our students return to the technical school in the future as some of those courses align with their career opportunities.
Would it be safe to say that some of those students are at our mill now, you think? Manufacturing
I
lab
think our mill has changed some of our participation
dynamics? Yeah.
because it is similar to a program that they have there.
Yes, that program's growing, I know. So,
Correct.
thanks. Okay.
Sorry to interject on your.
No, you're all
So we
right.
need to
Thanks.
move that forward then.
Any other discussion with 3.02? Okay, I'll move on to 3.03. It's we're asking a recommendation to approve the ERate purchases that are attached. They are for additional switches, UPSs, and networking equipment at various Mill Creek Township School District buildings. Essentially what this is every 5 years, the federal government has its approach of funding ERate. It's ERate funding, which allows you to, the federal government gives you money essentially. They'll pay 60% of your purchasing of networking equipment. Our new funding allotment for the next 5 years is 1.1 million, which means that we have to spend about $1.8 million in our capital funding equipment. I'll have more information to present on how we plan to spend those funds in March, but this is the first phase at various buildings of upgrading our network equipment. So 60% of that $253,000 that you see purchased will be funded by the federal government. Any questions?
This isn't our rate for data, like we use velocity for the bulk or anything like that. This is just hardware here, right?
This is in addition to, because we still receive that, and we take advantage of that in our budget. So it's about 60% there too.
Yes, this is just purely hardware.
Any other questions? Moving on to 3.04, this is an agreement for a software called GaggleNet Incorporated, and it essentially, I'll let Mr. Mosley speak a little bit more on behalf of what this product provides.
Hi. So Gaggle is a student safety software. It ties into their students' accounts. It'll look for things on their documents, their emails related to self-harm, suicide, drug use, abuse, things of that nature. We looked at 5 products. We narrowed it down to 3. And then we had a committee look at those 3, and Gaggle was the one that they felt would best suit our students. We do have other products similar to this for just web searches, but that's only a piece of the information that students are putting out there, so I'm not very good at public speaking. But we did run a test over Christmas and in January, and the amount of information it picked up was pretty enlightening. One thing we like about this product is that it also has a human component that will look over the flagged items. So to kind of eliminate some of the potential for error. And then on the most serious ones, they'll actually make a phone call versus just sending an email to alert. But we really think of how much we're doing with the students online, that, you know, we're talking about their social and emotional wellness, that this is something that, you know, working with our counselors would definitely be a beneficial product for the district.
I have a couple questions for you, Mr. Mosley, and I know why it's coming through this committee because it is a contract and it is IT. But I question, has Instruction and Student Services supported this type of program? What have they validated the need for it? Because it is both an IT and a student services component here.
They were involved in the committee when we were evaluating products. This initially came up on an ask from the core team based on a situation that occurred at one of our middle schools. That, you know, if this type of product could have helped prevented some of the issues that happened in that case. So they were definitely involved in that, as well as our counselors and core admin and building administrators as well.
Additionally, it certainly transcends just being an instructionally focused item. This is more about security. Of course, we've seen an increase across the country, and our district is not impervious to this, where we have a number of concerns around cyber threats. We've seen an increase in students being bullied via either cyber or some of our electronic platforms, some of our social media platforms. And so, in addition to that single incident that Mr. Mosley is alluding to, this is certainly a strategic approach to make sure that we have something in place that is preventative, as opposed to waiting until there are issues that occur with our students.
And there are a couple of districts around us that use this product as well. I did reach out to our RTSG members, and some of them spoke highly of it.
Purely on the IT side. Does this work only on MTSD devices, or is it anytime a student accesses any web-based MTSD software platform? So
This is tied to their MTSD Microsoft accounts as well as their Google accounts. So they have to be logged in with their account. If they're doing a web search, they have to be logged in with their MTSD account for it to find it. But it will also search their Google Drive as well as their Microsoft OneDrive. So any documents that they have saved on the school district's account, it will monitor that. And that could be from any device.
So when it flags a student or it tracks the students, who owns the tracking information on a student and where does it reside and how is it disposed of after a certain period of time? Because we're gonna scan all the students in the district to look for this, and we're gonna know what they search, what they're looking at, what their habits are. How do we protect those students from being targeted by advertisers, production, other products? How do we ensure that they're, you know, the student that's going around doing like normal student things isn't at risk of?
So
how do we protect
Gaggle's
that?
very aware of that, and they hold this information security very highly, and they do not sell the students' information. I can look deeper into that and get more information on that from our rep for you.
And if I can add to that, they have, as part of the contract, if you saw it, 2 attachments, both the privacy attachment and the student privacy attachment. There's a Gaggle student staff data privacy notice that is attached. And in addition to that is the Gaggle privacy policy, which is also attached. Acknowledging their responsibilities and identifying how they'll take care of the records, both in the disposal, complying with FERPA, complying with COPA. COPA doesn't really apply because they're not logging into their separate website, so COPA really doesn't apply. But they acknowledge COPA as part of their privacy and acknowledge their responsibilities. And, you know, back in August of 2021, you raised the issue about student privacy, and so we did at that time create a third-party checklist, which we review each contract with, and we did review this contract with that checklist to make sure all the items that are on our checklist are in the contract, and they are. So
I commend you for that and making sure that our students' privacy is of the utmost importance.
And I guess my question would just be on the being transparent with our students to make sure that they are aware. I mean, obviously they know that when they're using our devices, that their data is part of the district, but making sure that they're aware that their data is being analyzed and that they understand that. And I don't know how the best way to go about that is,
It's-
but I think we do need to be transparent with our students.
I know in our acceptable use policy, there is no expectation of privacy for our students when it comes to their district accounts.
So it's part of the notices that we send out on a yearly basis. It's part of the policy, which is on the website. And I think they even sign off on it as part of
Yes.
the yearly sign-off.
Any other questions?
Does anyone else have any questions for Mr. Mosley? Mr. O'Toole, you want to, while moving us through?
Yeah, one point I wanted to make, last point on that, is this is not budgeted for this year. This will require a budget amendment. So moving forward, 3.05 is this is the annual CoStar salt contract that we have. It's for the purchase of the salt when we plow. There's ice. You can see in there the details associated with that. Any questions in regards to this line item?
I see it says we're required to purchase 60%, basically is like the minimum. If we request 100 tons, we got to buy 60. Is that?
That's
sound-
not going to be a problem at all. I mean, we store a lot anyhow. So even if we had to purchase it, and just hypothetically, it was a very warm winter, we would be able to have it in storage. So that won't be an issue.
And we kind of keep, that's what my next question was going to be. We keep track if it is a winter, like until January, we had virtually no snow or anything. If we have extra, we take that into account when we buy it for the next year.
Yes, we do.
But we have plenty of room to store it.
Correct.
And then we have the right to sell it if we wanted to. If there's a shortage or whatever, and we got extra, we can.
I don't know the answer to that question, but
I'm just kind of curious, because sometimes there's all of a sudden there's a big need for it or something, so.
We could probably enter into
Premium
a
being
cooperative
had at the end of
agreement
the year.
with the township. Intergovernmental agreement. in regards
It's
to
certainly
the-
something you need in Erie, Pennsylvania, salt.
Right. I don't think we could sell it to the consumer out there, but we might enter into an intergovernmental agreement with the other municipalities.
And this is like a Pennsylvania co-stars. It's not the Council of Governments that they have. It's like the regular government that the municipalities use.
this is the CoStars.
Right, which is a state program, but I know that like the county has a council, a COG, that they get their stuff from.
Yeah, this is different.
And
For
it's
which
what we-
most times they piggyback off one another. So I would have to look into the details of whether or not it's the exact same.
It's something we've used forever, and it works.
Yeah.
Good enough. Thank you.
Any other questions? 3.06 is the Mill Creek Township fees for 2022, 2023 school year. These fees did not change from this current year. Any questions? Here none. 3.07 is the updated student activity account officers for this current fiscal year. And that's updates for McDowell High School. Any questions?
What's the smoking fee? $150.
Yeah.
That allow somebody to smoke?
Doesn't know.
No, they're caught smoking.
Oh,
That's the fee for being caught. That's the
Okay,
fine.
I just wondered if.
No, no, not you pay $150, you get to smoke.
So, okay.
That's per
All right.
occurrence.
I figured, hey, you got 100, Christ, you pay $10 a pack for a pack of cigarettes, so maybe like, here's 150, I'll smoke. Okay, my bad. Thank you.
All of our properties are tobacco free.
3 point, I'm sorry.
And we discourage our
3.07, is there
students
any
from
questions?
smoking.
Here none. I'll move on to 3.08. This is the security grant that we talked about receiving that was in the paper not too long ago. It's $500,000. It does require us to spend, in total, we'll be spending about $680,000 and we'll get $500,000 reimbursed. This motion is just to formally accept that grant. Any questions?
A couple of the things, I know you wrote the grant, and there's a lot of questions, Not being too.
So I have to really give a lot of credit to Mike Gallagher, who kind of led us into the direction of the grant, and then Tom Sambucino did a lot of work in order to get this grant as well, our SSO. We identified, based off of the list of items that we've already had established, the direction we wanted to go to improve our security within our buildings. We had taken a few items off of that to identify to pay with the grant. It is going to be more structural. It does not relate to labor. With that said, if we want to talk further details, we could talk in executive session, as it's not appropriate to
I
talk
think
about our
we're
security.
only 2 or 3 in the Western PA to get this grant, correct?
Yeah,
Yeah, so congratulations to the team there.
thank you. Any other questions? Moving on to 3.09 is the Manufacturing PA Training to Career Grant Award. You guys will, if everybody recalls, we actually received $200,000, just under $200,000 about 18 months ago, 2 years ago for this. Well, this grant here is again, Kyle Buckholtz as well as Bob Zeruda at the NWIRC teaming up and writing another additional grant while we received additional funding here, as you can see, of just under $100,000. Any questions? So they're doing a lot of great work down there in the manufacturing lab, and this will help continue to progress forward. 3.10 is a California Casualty Music Arts Grant. One of our teachers had written this, and it is for a grand total of $250.
Just a general comment about the 3.10, 3.09, 3.08. First, I want to thank our teacher, Ms. Jessica Alesso, for taking the time to write that grant. I also want to recognize your team and Kyle Buckholz and members for going above and beyond, going outside and writing these grants and securing these funds for our district. I mean, we're right now talking about over $600,000 that people took the time to step up and do grants. There are grants out there. I just want to acknowledge the hard work that was put in on behalf of the district.
Thank you. Any other questions? 3.11 is a donation from Amazon. I'm not sure. My assistant had received a phone call from Amazon. They donated a couple different fire tablets as well as some supplies. Again, I thought we could make some use out of it, so we accepted the donation, and this is to formally accept it. We already did 3.12, didn't we?
You did, yes.
Yes.
Okay, 3.13, accounts payable report. Any questions with 3.13?
The only question I have for you, Aaron, there is a significant amount of overtime with the custodials. I'm assuming that is all related to snow removal and the 50-plus inches of snow we received in the last 4 weeks.
Yes, snow removal, salting. When you're looking at the custodial as well as the maintenance, the staff, I mean, that's all it is. Custodial is a little combination. If we're short-staffed, some might be working overtime in terms of helping assist in, the shift before them or the shift after. But a lot of it does relate to snow removal, yes.
When we approve the accounts payable, then does that come up again at the end of the month?
It
Or is
does.
it does or does not?
Correct. We are just moving it forward to the end of the month for the entire board to approve.
Okay.
So there will
And-
be additional accounts information in there and additional payrolls that'll take in place in between now and then.
And I didn't know if it was possible for me to change my vote, probably not, from last month's accounts payable. I don't have a problem with the payroll or with the, but the accounts payable from Attorney Senate might be able to clarify that. Once I voted on it, it's done basically from January or no?
You would have to, at the board meeting or at the CAL, make a motion for reconsideration of the accounts payable and then ask the board to re-vote. Would be the only way you can do it.
To register my vote.
You can't change your vote just by announcing a change in vote.
Understand.
Once
Okay.
you voted, you voted. We'd have
Okay.
to redo the whole thing,
Yeah.
which I assume we've already paid those things.
Right.
Yes.
So a reconsideration is probably not in place because we've taken action based on the prior action. prior vote by the
So,
board.
Mr. Kabilka, would you, when I bring this forward, would you like me to separate accounts payable from payroll? this
Could you
month?
please, for tonight, yes, because I'm going to vote just no on that, so.
So you don't want it to bring it forward?
Uh,
He would like me to I asked him if he'd like us to separate accounts payable and payroll. So we'll do it in two votes, one for accounts payable and one for payroll, as opposed to both together, as I've historically done.
Like if there's an issue with it, should I, because it does seem like once it's approved, it's approved. Should I separate it out now, or should I vote against it at the end of the month?
Well, I think the vote for tonight is just for the committee to bring it forward to the board. And if you want to vote no in regard to a certain accounts payable item, that's more appropriate at the board meeting itself, as opposed to bringing it, unless you want further discussion and debate about a certain item that you want the committee to address. Then you could,
Yeah, if we could do that when we get to that point or whatever, if that
Okay.
that would appreciate that. Thank you.
So we're at that point. So we're taking discussion on 3.13. So accounts payable. If you glad to answer your question. What's the
Okay,
concern?
my issue is paying Attorney Weichler that is involved in a separate suit that involves myself and Lou Aliota. And I was advised by my counsel that I shouldn't vote for that. I don't know if it's a conflict or what it is, but I just want it on the record that I don't approve of that.
I mean, you can abstain or vote no, whichever your counsel has given you advice.
And I can do that at the end of the month.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. That's when I'll do that. That's all. Thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point on any of the 12 action items? If not, I would like to bring forward items 3.01, 3.02, 3.03, 3.04, 3.05, 3.06, 3.07, 3.08, 3.09, 3.10, 3.11, and 3.13 as a motion to bring to the board meeting at the end of the month on the 28th. And I have a second.
I'll second it.
Gary?
One last call for discussion, formality. Hearing none, all those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, we are on to informational items, 4.01, and I can take the first one. As the representative for the board at the JOC for the Erie County Technical School, just wanted to share with you all, and it's in the public section also for this, the phasing of how the tech school is going to be renovated over the summers for this summer 22 through to summer 23. There's also a list of how the temporary moves are taking place in that building so that they can accommodate all of the programs. One of the great things that they've been able to do is to make sure that all the programs are still functional in the building. The reason that the phasing has changed slightly is because they're having supply chain issues related to the commercial kitchen equipment. So they needed to pause the renovation of the kitchen for the culinary arts program until they could get the new equipment. They also had some challenges with the structural steel for the new addition, but they were able to work with all the contractors. At this point, there is no change order for the change of phasing, which is a big win for all of the districts in the tech school. If anyone has any questions on that, I'd be glad to answer them. Mr. Atul, I will turn 4.02 over to you.
All right, good evening. So tonight I was planning to present a PowerPoint regarding our budget that's broken down into several different sections. A little bit of, I pulled some information from PSBA and what they put out last year. Let everybody have a general understanding of how our funding works, how we compare, going to a forecast where I anticipate us to end this year, as well as the first draft of our budget for next year. So it is a little lengthy, so please bear with me as I will try to go through this as quickly but as efficiently as possible. Again, I like to start off every budget presentation with our mission statement. The Mill Creek Township School District provides a world-class education that prepares students to reach their potential as lifelong learners and responsible citizens. Our budget should have that in mind in every line item, as well as with the vision statement. We look through here. This is, again, as I mentioned, PASBA or PSBA report that was put out in 2020. But I think this report's very, very important in certain segments in this. So what this slide represents is the top 3 budget pressures are mandated costs for districts. This isn't just Mill Creek. These are districts across the state of Pennsylvania, with the first being your cyber enrollment, special ed cost, and pension cost. All 3 of those are mandated. We don't control those increases year over year. As we move on to a little bit of most public schools are relying on local resources. As you can see at the bottom right here, it shows an amount of source of revenue. So for suburban districts, you're looking at about $10.7 billion is generated in local revenue versus $4.5 million. Looking on the left-hand side where it says revenue sources as a percentage, this is really telling. You know, all school districts, about just under 60%, 58.5% is locally generated compared to 38.5 state generated revenue. Your rural areas is just about 50 compared to 48%, but your suburban is about 70% locally funded versus 29% state funded. We're no different. As you'll see, as we're working through these slides, we're a suburban district and we align to those metrics, much like most districts across the state. This slide here shows our revenue shares vary widely across the state of Pennsylvania. So as you're looking, this is every school district in the state of Pennsylvania as of 2020. The darker the purple means the more reliant you are on local revenue. The darker the orange, the more reliant you are on state funding. You look in there, there's only 2 purple districts in Erie County, Mill Creek and Fairview. Pennsylvania schools are among the lowest in the state in share of education funding, or not in the state, in the country, I apologize. If you look on the left-hand side, it talks about your percentage of revenue from state sources. Pennsylvania ranks 44 at about 39% generated from the state. If the state's not covering the cost to provide instruction, you're forced to look at your local resources. Property taxes continue to be a primary revenue source. As we had talked about beforehand, you know, within the suburban area specifically, you rely on your local resources highly, almost to the point of just under 70%. As you look here, this is slides more defined in terms of property taxes itself. In the suburban areas is about just under 58%. That's the state average. Moving on to pensions push the state spending higher nationally. You can look, our state spending is number 9 in the entire country in terms of expenditure per student. However, when you look at that, the pension costs are about 32% of that $15,000. Over $5,000 of our education our cost per student is allocated to pension costs. This slide shows a trend from, we look at the bottom left-hand side, a trend from 2008, 2009 up to 2018 school year. The red represents a pension cost and the increases over that time. The dark purple is the charter school tuition rate, and the lighter purple represents our special education costs. As you can see, over the last 10 years, as of 2018, over 600% increase in pension costs. Over just under 200% increase in charter school tuition. And just under 66% increase in special education costs. And I remind everybody, these are mandated costs. We don't control them, they're state mandated. These costs are growing faster than what our Act 1 index can actually cover. So if we look at the ECR, which is your contribution rate in terms of the pension overall, which is what this graph represents, is you can see as of the 2020-21 school year, for every dollar of salary spent, 34.5% is allocated to the pension system. This slide shows the state and federal shares of special education costs decreasing. So if you look at that bottom line is that bottom line represents the remaining share that needs to be covered, which is the difference between the state share, the middle line, and the federal share at the top. Long story, over time, the local share, you're going to have to pick up more because there's a decrease in the contribution from the federal and state government to help to fund our state funding, our special education funding, excuse me. So as I rephrase that, is the state and federal funding is decreasing year over year, which means you're have to rely more on your local resources to cover the cost of special education. This slide focuses strictly on mandated increases to charter tuition. You could see again from the 2008, 2009, all the way to 17, 18, the increases. The increase in the tuition paid was just under 200% alone. The enrollment was about 100%, just over 100%. Again, those growth rates over that 10-year period is exponential. And the state isn't providing any additional funding to help cover those increasing costs over all three of those state mandated costs. So I'm going to go into showing a little bit more comparison of Mill Creek. That was at a state level, which we're no different. We have those three state mandated costs, but let's look a little bit more about how Mill Creek's revenue as well as expenditures compare. So this slide shows Mill Creek 2021 actual results versus the actual results of the state average and local average for 1920. If you look at the local revenue, Mill Creek's just under 70 million that was generated as of the last fiscal year, which is about 65% of our total revenue. The state average is about 56%. The local average is about 37%. So what I'm trying to articulate within this slide here is we rely heavily on our local resources. Why? Because we receive less state funding. If you look at the local averages over here, is 56% of the local average is state funding. If we don't receive state funding, we're going to have to make up that difference, and I'll go into some more details here shortly. So this slide is just showing what the comparable districts are that I used. For the next couple of slides, you'll see that I have an IU average, as well as a common district average, state average, and where we are at Mill Creek. So this is our total revenue, or local revenue per student. The red represents Mill Creek. The gray represents the IU. Black represents common districts, as are represented by within a 41 to 47% free and reduced rate, and enrollment above 35,000 or 3,500 and under 11,500. So where does Mill Creek rank in terms of total revenue per student? And this is from 2011 to 2020. Red, we're just below the state average. We're well below the average of common districts that are common to us, and well above the IU average. In 2020, we ranked 201 out of 500 districts in terms of local revenue per student. And you can see this trend has been consistent year over year. For us to understand our local revenue a little bit further here is we have to understand an equalized mill. And essentially what an equalized mill is what's the tax burden that you're placing on your district and trying to equalize that to be able to compare taxes across every school district across the state. So if we look at our equalized mill for a comparable districts, you're looking at Mill Creek's tax burden. The lower the equalized mill, it generally refers to the less tax burden that you have on your taxpayers. The higher the equalized mill, the more tax burden. When you're looking at districts that are funded most comparable to us, well, we have the lowest tax burden looking out of that subgroup, which is important because it does drive a little bit more in state revenue which I'll be talking about here specifically. If you look at that equalized mill for all those in IU5, we're less than average. We're right in the middle of the pack. However, if you recall, 37% average is locally funded. They receive about over 50% of the local average receives 50% of their funding from the state, whereas we're about 36%. But meanwhile, our tax rate's lower than average. We want to look at what our tax rate is just overall. You can see it, take a look here, we're blue. I tried to highlight that to make it easy to identify. Again, our tax rate's middle of the road when you're looking within the IU5. And the IU5, I should have clarified this, I apologize, is mostly Erie County, a few other districts a little bit south. So understanding our tax rate a little bit further here is the benchmark analysis that I show here. This was a slide that was presented by BDO years ago, and I just continue to use it year over year because it shows the effect of compounding. You know, in 2009, if you look at the top section here, Mill Creek Township School District, and then the average tax rate increase are the two areas that I'm focusing on right now. 2009, Mill Creek didn't increase taxes. 2010-11, 5.32% increase. In 2011, 2012, didn't increase taxes. And then you can see the average increase in Erie County down below. Well, what's that translate when you're looking at additional revenue? So in 2009, 2011, because Mill Creek didn't raise taxes, they lost out on about just under 1.8 million. In 2010-11, did raise taxes, which generated about 1.2 million. And then in 11-12, didn't raise taxes, which lost out on about 1.2 million. If you add all three of those up, it's 1.8. However, that's not the only money that was lost. Because their tax rate adds on every year, there's a compounding effect to that. And that's essentially what we're showing down at the bottom side section of this. Is the first year was out, Mill Creek didn't generate 1.8 million. The second year, it's 740 that was lost out. And then in the third year, it was just over 2 million for a grand total of about 4.5 million. So not raising taxes 1 year impacts future revenue every year as we continue to move forward. As we're talking about tax rates, you know, it's not good just to raise taxes. You need to really understand your economy as well. And so what I tried to do is I used two marks here that are for way of determining inflation. I use CPI as well as the cost of living adjustment for Social Security. And I tried to take it back from 2006 to this current past year on what the growth has been year over year. Essentially, are we keeping up with inflation? Are we not keeping up with inflation? Is it what we're trying to measure out of this? As you can see here, red is Mill Creek, CPI is the green line item, and gray is the COLA line item. And I just took that over since 2006, added them up, what's been the growth? If you look from about 2014, 15, we've been mirroring pretty much the increases in terms of growth of inflation. Prior to that time, we weren't, which in turn means lost revenue at the end of the day, as well as the economy was growing, but we weren't taking advantage of that. The last year or two, you can see that gap's starting to widen. But if we look from 2016, 2006, MTSD is about 6.14% behind CPI and about 10.44% behind COLA in terms of growth, our tax rate versus those inflationary factors. And that's about a lost revenue of about $5.9 million specifically for this fiscal year. Understanding the driving factors behind our state funding is they have a lot of different metrics that they use, and one of those is your market value personal income aid ratio. Essentially what they do is take whatever the value of the homes within the school district, the income, your personal income, which they take off of the state taxes, and weight that across the state average. The lower the market value personal income aid ratio is, the more wealthier the district's perceived to be. So if we take a look here at what our market value personal income aid ratio has been, you can see a red common districts are black, the line in the middle, the IU5 at the top. So this ratio really helps explain why other districts in the IU5 are receiving more state funding. They're needed additionally. They don't have the ability to raise it locally. And that's the entire premise behind the state's revenue, state's funding model, is if you have the ability to generate it locally, you should. If you don't, they're going to provide additional state funding to help offset that. But you can see how much below our market value personal income aid ratio is compared to other districts that are comparable to us, for which those districts were also generating more local revenue per student than what we were. So let's take a look at how that ratio is applied to an actual state funding formula. I just want to focus on the bottom level here, where you're looking at your district total, your equalized millage multiplier. We already discussed our equalized millage multiplier. We showed that those districts that were common to us, ours was rather low or middle of the pack when it comes to the IU5 average. And your times your market value personal income aid ratio would give you your district proration. These are some of the funding formula you have. Our market value personal income aid ratio was rather low, as was our equalized millage. Therefore, we're going to receive less state funding. So let's take a look. Our total state revenue per student, you can see that Mill Creek's well below everybody. We actually ranked 415 out of 500 school districts in 2020. We look at our federal revenue per student, we ranked at 242 out of 500 in 2020. We look at our total current revenue, that's if you didn't issue any debt and have any large fixed asset sales, is what current revenue is you can see that we're well below the average of both our common peers, as well as the IU, as well as the state average. Our total revenue in 2020 ranked 450 out of 500 school districts. Only 50 school districts generated less revenue per student than we did. So let's take a look at the other side of this, which is our expenditures. It's the same concept for the graph that you see coming here, and this is our instructional cost. We ranked 463 out of 500. We're well below our common peers as well as the IU5 average. If you look at our support services, we rank 304 out of 500. We're about in line with our common districts. Our non-instructional services, which is really our extracurriculars essentially, you can see we rank 403 out of 500 districts. If I'm moving too fast, please tell me to slow down, but I know I'm trying to move. Total current expenditures, which is basically all of our expenditures with exception of debt. We ranked 430 out of 500 school districts. And then when you add in debt, our total expenditures per student ranks 456 out of 500. We're not generating revenue. We can't spend it on our students, which means we rank 456 out of 500. So let's talk. I know a lot of folks that ask about our fund balance, and I think it's appropriate to take a look at our fund balance and where we compare in terms of others. So that blue block that you see up here, this is our fund balance for the general fund balance as a percentage of your expenditures. That's what represents the dot, those black dots everywhere. Mill Creek is where that blue block is. I tried to make it. When you're looking at IU5, our fund balance is rather low in terms of percentage of our expenditures compared to those within IU5. You want to look at our districts, our common peers that are funded most alike us. We're about middle of the road. I am comfortable with our fund balance and where it is because we do control a lot of our own outcome. As we rely heavily on our local resources, that means we can generate additional revenue if we need to. Therefore, you don't need as much in savings. This slide is, I've used this slide in a lot of different presentations, but this is just to say we don't just not look at revenue. We've been aggressive in how can we raise additional revenue. I mean, we've brokered deals with Lecom and Wegmans. We've continued to challenge us property assessments to the tune that over the last 7 years, about 124 million was increase in property assessments, which last year generated about $1.8 million. We've sold our buildings that we weren't using. The Nature Center for 1.5 million, Bernardale for 900,000. We've developed investment strategies to try to earn as much as we can, although the market's not very good at this moment in time. I do hope the Federal Reserve increases their rates a few different times this year. We've moved our discount rate forward. We've looked at our state funding, the reimbursement. I showed you one formula that was in there, but what measures can we do to increase our state funding? One example is we've improved our special education reimbursement by $100,000 annually. Our federal money about $250,000 annually. So we're not just sitting still and just waiting for additional appropriation. We're actually looking at what we can do to generate additional revenue. On the other side of that is we've got to control our expenditures. 2013, it closed 2 buildings. We've looked at programs that were underutilized. It didn't make sense from a fiscal standpoint to maintain those programs, such as Alternative Education North Coast or the Montessori program. We've eliminated positions. We've continued to negotiate rates, whether that's with our workers' comp or our property liability or any of these contracts. We're consistently trying to negotiate a better rate. As I just mentioned, we've been adjusting staffing with enrollment. We know enrollment's been declining over the last 10 years. That's not new to Mill Creek. Erie County's enrollment's declining. The state of Pennsylvania's enrollment's declining. So this slide here represents the orange line represents the decline in enrollment for Mill Creek since 2012 or 13 to this past year. The blue line represents the cumulative change and adjustment in our staffing. So we have adjusted staffing according to our enrollment decline. If we look at our enrollment projections moving forward, this is where we've been historically. Those bars represent the total enrollment for a year. At the bottom, it's 2011 to 2020, I believe. And then the blue line represents the free and reduced percentage over those time. That's the purple line, I apologize. And then the blue line represents your special education enrollment over that time. You can see our free and reduced percentage has gone up. It's starting to dip down. Our special education enrollment is about peaked, about 18%. Our overall enrollment's declined. But as I mentioned, that's the case for Erie County as well as the state. We look at that by grade level for where our enrollment was last year. It goes from pre-K to 12 at the bottom. In 6th grade, we do typically always see a jump in our enrollment. A lot of non-pub school children come and go to the public sector. I do expect kindergarten to bounce back. We are experiencing, looking at our real estate transfer data as well as our earned income tax data, a lot of younger families are moving into Mill Creek. So I do expect us to buck the trend, for lack of a better expression here, in terms of our enrollment to increase. I don't expect that to be substantial or material at all, but I don't expect to see that decline that we've been experiencing. So that takes us, I wanted to explain how our money is generated and then how we compare in terms of spending. Now we're moving into where we expect to end this year. So starting off with local revenue, if we look at our real estate taxes, we expect to have a positive variance of about $340,000. This slide shows our local revenue down the left-hand side, where we ended this past fiscal year, our budget, and the forecast, and a variance and a percent change. So I do expect that we'll end the year about the local real estate taxes have a positive variance of about 337. I'm not entirely certain why. Since COVID hit, we've actually collected better on our property taxes than we have historically. I can't explain that trend, but if we are collecting more in our real estate taxes, that means our delinquent, which you can see down third from the bottom, is going to be less because there's less to collect in delinquent. So those two really need to be offset. Our earned income tax, our EIT, is $140,000 positive. We've really, LST, EIT, we've rebounded to pre-COVID levels. Our real estate transfer tax, as I mentioned, the rather large growth and high demand for properties has driven that line item to be a surplus of $410,000. As we talked about our interest rates, they haven't been where we expected them to be. However, we hope the Federal Reserve will adjust rates multiple times this year, which would change that outcome. That gives us a positive variance of about $549,000 for this current fiscal year. If we look at our state, I'm going to focus on the basic ed funding formula as well as the special ed school age. The state in their budget this year did have additional appropriation, which gave us additional $376,000 for basic ed funding, as well as $97,000 for our special ed funding. Our basic ed Social Security, as well as the bottom line item, our state share for retirement contribution, I will show that we're expecting to spend less than expected for salaries. Those are all a percentage of salaries. So if you don't spend as much in salaries, you're not going to have as much reimbursement back. But overall, a positive variance of $446,000. Our federal money, it's rather level with the exception of how we're planning to use our ESSER money, the stimulus money. We are used more than what we anticipated in the budget. We're expecting to use about 1.34 million more. So that's about $1.3 million positive surplus. If we look at that over the time, 2020, 2021 budget, our forecast, you can see where we're trending over time. And again, just under 64% of our total revenue is locally generated. Looking at the other side, looking at our salaries. So our administration salaries, we're actually expecting a positive balance of just under $40,000. We had some positions move over the course of this for retirements or movement into new positions, and those transitions and the timing to replace those positions is generating that savings. The teachers has about just under $1.9 million savings, that line item. That's a primarily result of 26 open positions. If you go and look at LOAs, that's going to need to be offset with the teachers because we have a negative variance of about 1.5 million because we have 40 LOAs. And then some of
Do you have a chart that would show our salaries compared to the 500 districts in Pennsylvania? You know, like, are we in the top 100? Are we in the top 200? Are we middle of the pack?
I could provide that the next presentation.
Still coming up.
Not here tonight. I didn't include that, but
Oh, okay.
I'm going to have to give an updated budget report anyway, and I could provide that.
Please, thank you.
Secretary classified had a positive variance of 130,000. That's because of we haven't rehired a couple of positions. That's offset by the expected hiring of these positions. And then not to mention I had two positions budgeted in this line item, but one of them is being paid out of the technical support line item, and the other one we still haven't hired. So there's going to be a savings all year long if we haven't hired the position. You can see the overtime over, if I move down into the custodial SSO, it's a negative or a positive variance there as well. Well, it's the timing of filling our custodial open positions. We've had a lot of turnover. Especially when you go down to the educational assistant, there's $136,000 savings. The timing of these positions that have been open, those taking unpaid days, we still have 8 positions that were open. So with the massive amount of turnover that we've had, which is unusual, then compared to past, there's going to be a savings because those positions aren't filled. That generated about a $467,000 savings. Benefits. Clearly, your FICA and PSERS, if you have less that you're paying in salaries, they're a percentage of salaries. Therefore, you're going to have a savings for those two line items. This is all offset by healthcare. over the last couple of years, we've been trending flat. Although the national average is anywhere between 6 and 8% increases over year, we've been trending flat. Well, that's no longer the case. We're trending at about a 3.5% increase. Therefore, you see the negative variance here of 284,000. As we look into all of our other expenditures, our total contracted service, we are expecting to overspend at $1.7 million. That's primarily because we've tripled our substitute rate. That comes at a cost in doing so, as well as we added a mental health contract that was going to be used ESSER funding for, but that's the cost that we're projecting out. Our property services is going to be a little over a $500,000 negative variance. We've had to use coach buses because we don't have enough drivers for extracurricular activities. That as well as a future IT lease that we're planning. Looking at moving on to transportation field trip, we're running less routes than we historically have been. We budgeted for 92 routes. We're only running 75 routes per day. That comes at a savings of $173,000. Tuition is about $2.9 million negative variance. That's a little misleading because $2.2 million of that $2.9 million is a result of a VOTEC construction project. That was all based on timing. We have the money in our fund balance to offset that, so that will require a budget amendment. However, we did in our budget, if we recall from last year, we budget aggressively in this line item for about $500,000, $600,000 aggressive, thinking that we would recruit students back from charter schools. That has not been the case. So that is going to be the outcome of this line item. We look at our supplies and utilities. A lot of that's a negative variance, but a lot of that's ESSER funded. So it was already accounting in the positive variance on the other side of it. Same thing for the equipment as we're moving down. But overall, you're looking at about $5.6 million deficit. What's that look like over time? You can see that here. Salaries and benefits is about 70% of our total budget. That's expected. We're in the people business. Most of our funding should be going to our folks. So what's that look like? This waterfall graph shows the revenue as we're building up and then how we spent, working our way back down. We're about $3.2 million deficit. However, as I mentioned, $2.2 million of that is expected out of the VOTEC construction project. So we're operating at about $1 million deficit this current fiscal year. What are some of the options that we can do to eliminate that deficit? Well, we can look at our ESSER funding and kind of redistribute that based on what we expected. Therefore, we can use some of those funds to offset with the increase in the subrate. We could delay our IT lease. However, that's only going to make our equipment older. We can reduce the volume of PD. Those are a few of the options that we have available to us to reduce that. Otherwise, that is coming out of our fund balance. So as we move on to the budget, these slides are going to be pretty much the exact same. I just updated it. So rather than using the forecast, so your 2021 actual and then your 21-22 budget, I did 22-23 expected budget. And then I show the variance by comparing the budgets. As you can see, there's a positive variance in the budget expected for next year of 396. That's because I increased the collection rate by 5%. That's been the trend the last 2 years. Again, that's going to be offset down below with your delinquent taxes by 200,000. I was more aggressive in the LST and earned income tax for about $274,000 together because we are trending at pre-COVID rates and actually a little higher for earned income. So in total for our local revenue, I added about $713,000 to our local revenue for next year's budget. That does not include a tax increase. We look at our state funding. I took advantage of the additional appropriation as we discussed for our basic ed as well as our special ed subsidies. There's a few other as Social Security as well as our retirement. So Social Security is the second line item there of $64,000. Retirement's the bottom line of $390,000. As salaries increase, as do you get receiving half of that in subsidy. And then our rental reimbursement was reduced by 429,000. That's based on our debt payments. So there's an increase of 613,000. Our federal funding, I increased our ESSERS funding based on our spending and what we plan to spend by 702,000. So if we look at our total revenue, 51% real estate taxes, 7% earned income tax, 6% other, followed by basic funding of 14, special ed funding 4, 12% reimbursable, 5% other. Our salaries, essentially, we've added a Chestnut Hill assistant principal and the administrative line item. We had 26 open positions that are teacher line item that I budgeted at step 3. Our LOAs I had to increase based on trend. Our secretary classified line item, I removed the 2 IT positions and put those into the technical line item, but I also added an HR position. As been discussed over the last couple of meetings, the technical side, you'll see the result of budgeting essentially. I'm moving from one item into the next. Our custodial I added an additional SSO. And then you can see the other line items as you're going. I did budget for overtime that we've been seeing in trend. For in total salaries, it would be additional $1.7 million. And most of those are at 2% raise increases. So if we look at benefits, our benefits overall, if your PSERS and your FICA is going to go up as because they're a percentage of your salaries. You can see those 2 items there of 128 and 790. And again, I had to make up 2 years worth of funding. So for the last 2 years, I are trending out about just under 7% increase in healthcare. So when you add all that up, it's another $1.7 million that needs to be made up from this past year's budget into next year's. If we look at our overall expenditures, I anticipated us decreasing our sub-rate amount, so it's not tripled. I figured it would be about double what we have here. Again, there's a lot of, we can discuss that further because that will change that line item material. The IT lease that I added in there for your property services. Tuition, moving down to tuition, it is a negative variance of 850,000 because I budgeted realistically how we're performing. We haven't recruited back. We're going to have to budget according to supplies and utilities. A lot of that is ESSERS funded that we'll be working through. Debt, you can see additional 1.2 million at the bottom. That was expected with the debt issue that we just issued of 62 million. There's a balloon payment of $1.2 million this year. We plan to use fund balance. So long story short, if you look at this in this pie chart, we control less than 6% of our expenditures year over year. We look at that, what the outcome is with the revenue that I just explained and the expenditures, we're short $6.4 million for next year's budget. With that said, we know, I'm going to look at that bottom bullet point first. There were some things that we anticipated using fund balance for in the amount of $2.2 million. And then that doesn't include a tax increase. If we raise taxes to the index, it'd be raising about 2.3 million. So that puts us about $2 million deficit of our budget next year without doing any cuts. What's that look like to our fund balance? I showed you what the estimate was for 21-22. So if you look at the bottom, this shows our different areas of fund balance across the top. If I just move down to the bottom by summarizing what we just went over, we were at $27.8 million. Our fund balance would be about 18.2 if we continue to operate and function the way that we are, and we would have a strong structural deficit moving forward. I'll try to get through that quickly. I know it's late. Any questions?
Is it possible to get a list, Aaron, of our pilots? Because our local taxes is like 55 million and pilot is 400,000. It's less than 1%. I'd be kind of curious who's paying pilot and what they're paying.
Yeah, I have that. It's not many.
50% of what their normal tax would be. Is that normally our pilot?
That's correct.
It just seems like a low number to me.
Yeah, we'll provide that.
Thank you.
Mr. O'Toole, would this be available for the public to see at a later date?
Yes. It's videoed, so it will be available on the website, the video. We plan to have that under the business office department. I'll work with Katie to ensure that.
Thank you. Is it on the public side?
Aaron, one of the things that you budgeted for revenue was an increase in real estate transfer taxes. This current year, how does that rank comparatively to the trend? Was this a high year, one of the highest years?
Yeah, the last 2 years have been.
So as you're projecting, and interest rates are theoretically moving up per the statements made by the Federal Reserve, you're projecting more real estate transfer revenue next year than this year, even though we're going to see an increase in rates for mortgages.
I'm projecting more compared to a budget, less compared to actual outcome. So it's not strictly just interest rates that are driving that, right? It's a low inventory in Mill Creek as well is driving a high sales price. So you've got to kind of take a look at all that data together.
Any thought about going after EIT and LST for people who are working at home that might have used to work somewhere else in the municipality?
We're reviewing a program that try to reconcile that further to ensure that we're getting the appropriate money flowing to the district. However, that is a double-edged sword. We might lose some as well.
Obviously, COVID has had a big change on where the workplace is technically located.
I mean, overall, again, with the salaries, we saw the increase or the savings in salaries for this current fiscal year. I do anticipate us struggling to fill positions moving forward. There's a low supply of teachers as it is. If you look at the unemployment data for the state of Pennsylvania, we're pretty much back to pre-COVID levels. However, when you look at the demographic data and specifically the population from 18 to 35, it is declining in the state of Pennsylvania, the overall workers. So the volume of those available to take these positions isn't there either.
So your projection for 2022 and 2023 includes some of those positions remaining open, or it is assuming that we would fill every position?
I assume that we'd fill every position for the entire year. Based on what I just stated, I mean, we do probably need to go back and realistically budget, understanding that some of these positions and the timing of replacing them is going to have a savings, right?
Thank you for that very thorough review. It looks like we have some serious work to do here moving forward to
Yeah, what's
get
next
this
step?
manageable.
I forgot the last slide there. It was the timeline. So the timeline I'll present again with a revised budget. We're gonna have to go back and make some cuts based off of all the requests that were made. So in March, we'll provide a updated budget of where we are at that time. Hopefully we'll have some additional money or additional information to be able to provide in regards to our healthcare and some of those other items that we need some quotes on. Because again, inflation's at an all-time high too right now, right? I mean, everything's costing much more as it historically has. So we need to let some of that level out as we continue to progress through this timeline. So we'll present a new revised budget in March with a 5-year forecast. In April, we're going to need to approve a preliminary budget, and then in May, we'll approve a final.
Aaron, we had some buses. Are those like the first student school buses, or are those the small vans like we use?
Buses are first student.
We have to buy the buses,
No, that's all part of the contract that we have with first student.
but we had like 1.7 million, I think it was, for IT.
That's the number of routes that we've been using. So not the cost of the buses, but the number of routes.
So that's not, like physically, we're not spending $100,000 for a bus. We're just paying more for what we're using.
Correct.
And then I just wanted to make a statement about the IT, is that's kind of always gotten the back going back 10 years, we've always kind of danced that around, and I think that's the most important thing we have is, of course, the teachers, but the IT part of it is the world, and it does not make sense to try to cut there. We've never been a leader in Erie County for IT compared to other districts, and I personally want to make the statement that's not the place to go.
Would agree. So I mean, as of right now, the lease is part of that, right? We recognized the savings last year. We knew that this was coming. We were going to have to build out, and then we have another year of increases after that, and then we should be leveled out for the future. Just some inflation numbers as we're trying to move forward.
No more questions on the presentation. We do have one more informational item. I'm sure Mike has been waiting patiently back there.
Sure. I'll start. I'm not sure if Mike's online or.
Yeah, I can speak to it online. So this is a report we had done for the exterior of all of our schools. You know, if you go around some of the schools, you can see that there's some deterioration on the exterior with some water issues. So we contracted Northwest Restoration to do a full study of all of those, and this is the findings of the report. He's got it broken down. Some of it he said to address within 3 to 5 years. Some he's suggesting immediately. It comes out to about $2.75 million. So we wanted to present this tonight as information that we obtained from that survey. Any questions?
Mike, I know you and I touched base on this earlier, but can any of these repairs be built into the annual capital maintenance project budget? Are we able to manage it through that process, or are we looking that we have to do this as like more of a lump sum, one-time project?
No, I think we'd be able to take chunks of it at different times. Some of it more immediate, and then some we can hold off for a few years. And then I know Aaron can speak to the budget. I know we had it budgeted somewhere. I want to say it was about $2 million that we were planning on using it in one of those funds. And I'll let Aaron speak to that.
Yeah, we did part of our bond and the resolution that passed. There was $2 million associated with this. I think this is just overall for us showing informational. At the end of the day, Mike and I still need to kind of go over some more details, but really why we're here is it sounds like the board is wanting to extend this as much as possible, for which we can try to include into our capital projects fund and that maintenance cost as compared to doing it all outright. For us, we probably need to come forward and determine a little bit more of what absolutely has to be done right away, and we'll use the bond money to do that. And then try to come up with a plan to address it longer term. Is that what I'm understanding?
Correct.
So we can do that.
If there are no other questions for the informational items, I'd like to move us on to